We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there, a bit bewildered, but he cares.
Hello, I'm Thomas Gale. I'm a producer of Changing Our World. Welcome, and today we have our usual host, Linda Weltner, with us to tell us about her journey to Burma and what has happened since then. Linda, I'm so happy that you were able to be here today and tell us your story about the journey to Burma.
Well, it's pretty amazing to be there, so I'm glad to bring the stuff back.
What inspired you and Jack to go to Burma, which is now called Myanmar?
Well, you know, they've just opened the country, so it has just been open to tourism. Before that, you could only get a visa for one day. Burma is sort of the most isolated, one of the most isolated countries in the world. So they're opening to tourism, and Jack and I thought, well, let's go see what happens to a country before capitalism arrives. And we thought we'd never get another chance because, you know, all the big companies will be moving in, and we wanted to see what life looked like, maybe more than 100 years ago.
The name is no longer Burma. Can you tell us why they changed the name?
Right. Well, the Burmese have this wonderful tradition, I like it, which is that, say some misfortune falls you and your family, and you're sick, and you recover, and you decide, well, the Nats, which are the Nats, they're the evil spirits, or mischievous spirits, they won't be able to find you if you change your name. So you might change your name to Mint Mint, which would mean rich, rich. And then you would maybe have better fortune. So this changing of names is very popular as a way to kind of avoid bad luck. And after the generals had massacred the students in the streets during a peaceful protest, they decided that it would be helpful if they changed the name. Then maybe nobody would remember that the crimes had happened there.
Wow.
But it isn't so unusual in that the name Burma had been given by the British. So they took the name Burma and changed it back to Myanmar, which is what it was originally called. And Rangoon, which is a lovely name, became Yangon. So they returned maybe 100 towns that had been renamed by the British forces and gave them back. And then when they killed all the monks, they decided to move the capital. So they moved the capital out of Rangoon to a place called Naypyidaw, which means City of the Kings. And so now they felt that they were cloaked in the old traditional kingship rights and that they were on a new path.
We're in a setting here with temples behind us.
Yes, we are. We're in a place called Bagan, which the Burmese believe in karma. And so the whole purpose of your life is to improve your next life when you are reincarnated by doing good deeds and contributing money and food to the monks and just in general being a good person. That's the path to a better life. And one of the things, they believe that whoever determines how you come back in your next reincarnation is to build pagodas. So we were to several places where there were 1,000 pagodas. And Bagan is an area, there used to be houses here, but they've all fallen apart because they were just made out of bamboo or straw. So this is where there are just hundreds and hundreds of temples. One interesting thing is the generals who have ruled with a brutal, bloody hand for the last 29 years wanted to fix it up. It's supposed to be eligible to be an international, the UN gives these places a special status in the world. But they noticed that some of the tops had fallen off. So they got somebody to put cement tops on, the same kind of cement tops on all of them, whether they were 3rd century, 8th century, whatever. And actually, because they were a different color too, they sort of messed up the area, and the UN is withholding its approval. it's still an amazing, amazing place.
You went there as a tourist.
Right.
However, you had something else in mind before you left.
I don't think you can go without a tour. There were, I have to say, someone my age, because there were a lot of kids in backpacks who didn't mind that almost nobody speaks English. And even those who do speak English, sometimes it's very hard to know what language they are speaking because they're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllables. So I personally wouldn't feel comfortable just landing there. And there are two kinds of tours. One uses all the government buildings. So you stay at fancy hotels, you eat in nice restaurants, all of which are owned by the generals, and the profit from them goes into the general's pocket. But we went with a tour that was out of Thailand, and the guy knew the country and had traveled there a lot. So we stayed in what's just starting now, private inns and restaurants run by individuals. And they're just getting the hang of it because we went to one place and we sat there with all the food in front of us, which looked delicious, and the staff had forgotten to give us any silverware. And they had retreated because they didn't want to impose on us, or they were afraid we would speak to them. So we had to send someone to get them to tell them we couldn't really eat these, what looked like Chinese dishes, like you just can't eat them with your hands. So we went with a tour guide. And he happened to be a person, he was married to a Thai woman, and he's a Buddhist, who had been very active in the villages. So in addition to the tour sites, we went to visit several very, very primitive villages where he was helping pay for certain of the more outstanding students in the elementary school there, which only went up to third grade, to get further education. And so I got to hang out for 2 days and as if we didn't live there, but we got there early and stayed and got to get the feel for what it would be like to live in one of those villages. What other reason did I go there? Well, I teach at Explorers, which is the senior adult education program at Salem State. I read a couple of books before I went there, but I knew I wanted to really study it in depth and teach it. So I bought all kinds of clothing because my style is to go in and do performance art so that I am the person, that point of view. And so I came in as a history professor from the University of Yangon. I came in as one of the generals and defended my actions. I came in as a Padang guy, which is to give the indigenous perspective. I came in as Aung San Suu Kyi to tell what had happened to her. And I came in as a Buddhist monk with a bald head. And I had some of the monks there teach me how to put on a Buddhist robe.
Later in the program, we'll be talking to Aung San Suu Kyi. What other places did you go to while you were there?
Well, there's a traditional trip now that you take. You go to Yangon, you go to Mandalay, you go to Bagan, which is fantastic, and you go to Inlay Lake, which is remarkable. It's famous for its fishermen who paddle with their foot. They stand up in their boat, which is very steady, and they use this foot and arm. So I don't know if you can see my leg, but they've got it curled around the paddle. And then they fish with these big baskets because the lake is not very deep. And they see the fish and they put the basket down on top of it. And then they close it and they can haul the fish up. So we went to Inlay Lake. But in addition, we went into some of the newly opened tribal areas. For a long time, visitors were only allowed in a small part of the country because there were wars with the indigenous people who were being repressed. And under the new government, because now they've moved, they actually had an election in 2010. And so they're loosening up the allowances for letting people in. They're loosening up the censorship of the newspapers. All that's only compared to what was before. And they've made peace treaties with a lot of the indigenous people. So we were able to go into one of the indigenous areas and meet the Pa'o people and go to a celebration at a temple. And one of the things we did is we stopped in a temple where the abbot had died, and his body was laid out there in the middle of the monastery, and they were building the funeral platform that they were going to put him on, and they were building a casket from scratch, and they were decorating the whole thing with all kinds of beautiful colored papers, and then they were going to carry him into town and burn him. One of the things that's part of the Buddhist practice is, like, for example, your abbot might give you a lotus blossom. And so you look at it, of course it's a lovely, beautiful flower. And then as the days go by, it starts to wither. And so the idea is, oh no, now, oh look how bad that is, look how horrible it looks. It's see the beauty in the withering, see the beauty in the dead flower. Accept that everything is impermanent.
What is happening now in Myanmar?
It has now been liberalized to some extent, but the Constitution is such now that no one can run for president who's been married to a foreign person. So that was put in specifically by the generals to keep Aung San Suu Kyi, who had married an Englishman, from ever attaining the presidency of the country. So while she's in the parliament at the moment, she's pretty much helpless. And her job at this moment is to reassure the generals that if she ever took power, she wouldn't revenge herself upon them, because all the same people who kept her under house arrest in isolation for 15 years. And at any time, she could go home, but she knew they wouldn't let her back in. So she watched her husband die in England without her and didn't leave. She is now in office hoping that she can woo the generals into reversing that constitutional amendment so that she will be able to run in 2015.
We are now in Rangoon, and we welcome Aung San Suu Kyi. Welcome, Aung San.
I'm very happy to be here. Very, very glad to be able to leave the country. Finally, I've been doing a lot of traveling.
You are internationally known, having been honored with the Nobel Peace Prize.
You know, the worst part about house arrest is that you feel that you are no longer part of the human family, that you are alone, that other people are having birthday parties and seeing their grandchildren and celebrating with one another, and that you have been forgotten. And when I received the Nobel Peace Prize, what it meant to me was that I was remembered, that the world, though I was shut out from the world still took notice of me, and it gave me heart. You know, many people wonder how I could have withstood 15 years of actually solitary confinement, except for an uneducated maid. I did not have access to a telephone. I was not given, I had a radio, and that was about my only connection to the world. But I devoted myself to serious Buddhist practice, and rose at 4 o'clock every morning and meditated and read the sutras and studied the Buddhist teachings. And one of his teachings is the reality of impermanence. So it teaches you great patience, the idea that this too will change. Things must be different. They cannot remain the same. That is the nature of life. And that was a big help. And also the Buddha teaches that a violent mind, a violent heart has no room for love. When you let those emotions take over, then you close out all hopes of being able to cultivate loving kindness. And that is what I did. I worked on forgiveness and clearing my heart of rancor and anger. Now that I have been elected to the Parliament, many people object to the fact that, for example, I watched the military parade, sitting with the generals, the very men who had locked me away from life, really, for so many years. 21 years passed between my first year of house arrest and my last. And they would not give visas to my boys or my husband, so they were not allowed to visit me for the last 10 or 12 years. And in order to see my family, which, as you can imagine, a mother's feelings, in order to see my family, I would have had to leave Burma knowing that I could never return when so many people had died or were in jails that are beyond description, beyond anything that people here can imagine. I couldn't abandon those who had suffered so much more than I had. But I never changed my mind about the importance of forgiveness and treating all living things, even those who have harmed you, with loving kindness. And what some people, saying I've become a politician, I have sold out, but I am only being true to what the Buddha taught, which is live in the present and do not hold on to grudges, because they poison the one who holds them. And revenge only leads to counter-revenge, and what our country needs now is peace and reconciliation, and to move ahead to make a better world for the people of Myanmar.
Now, a beautiful movie which I've seen recently called The Lady is a biography of your life and the sacrifices that you made and your husband and 2 children. How do you feel about that movie?
Well, first let me just say, I love that they call me the lady. I've also been called the Nelson Mandela of Burma, and other very flattering terms that I'm not sure I deserve. How do I feel? Well, to see my sons as children and then to see them again as adults, it's very hard, very hard. And the boys have not had it easy. When their fathers died, they were left alone in England with relatives. And I don't know if in my heart, in their hearts, they fully understand why I could not return to be with their father. But everyone pays a price. Everyone suffers. As Buddha says, life is dukkha. And the only way to alleviate that suffering is to control your desires and your cravings for things that you cannot have. And in this lifetime, at least, I wasn't really able to have the roles as mother and wife. But I hope that I created something in the world that is lasting and will change the whole country in exchange for my small sacrifice. I like that movie.
Do you feel that your sacrifice and your family's sacrifice was worth it with today's conditions in Myanmar?
Well, I think right now in Myanmar we are walking on a precipice, and whether we'll find our balance or topple back into dictatorship is totally up for grabs. I am planning to run for president in 2015 if I can get the generals to agree to change the Constitution. And I hope that we can slowly move from a strong central government to one where people learn to take responsibility. What has happened actually is our people, my people, have spent their time doing good deeds, caring for the monks, helping others in their hopes for a better life. And what we need to do is teach an entire population that in this life there are ways to change things, that it isn't totally karma that determines what happens to you, but that your government plays a very, very big role, and that you can change that government, which is something they have never known or seen in action. So I have come to change the government, and so I hope that others will see that model and will understand that there are new ways of doing things in the world. And I think the advent of foreign television and foreign visitors and contact with Americans and Germans and young people who come backpacking through our country will have an impact. I see it already, although I'm not sure I'm pleased with it, in that our younger folk are wearing T-shirts and jeans and singing hip-hop. So we'll hope that the changes are for the better.
What of the culture in Myanmar? Has it changed? Is there a real culture there now?
We have a very, very strong culture that has not been affected that much by modernization. We have almost no machines. People still make fabric by hand. And in fact, the gold leaf that we put on the Buddha statues, those are beaten by hand by boys wielding heavy hammers and hammering that gold into thin shivers. Even our roads now are not built by machine. The vast majority of them, people use pickaxes and, just hit rocks. So we've kept our whole culture. And of course, the problem is to save the best parts of that culture. The calm and the dignity and the endurance and perseverance, and not lose that sense of the sacred being everywhere in your life, while letting in modernity and a consumer culture which could possibly really wreak havoc in a society where most people own, 2 or 3 lingeries. And I don't know if you realize, but my skirt is one continuous piece of fabric, and you can use it as a turban, you can use it as a tablecloth, you can use it to carry your groceries. The men wear lingeries also, and they can pull them up and make shorts out of them. You can carry babies in them. We have a culture with very low waste, and we have a culture with very little use of energy. So in that sense, we could be a beacon to the nation, although I'm a little bit afraid that it may work the other way, and that Western habits of consumption and waste will come to Myanmar.
I understand that the population is growing. What can you tell us about that for the future?
The population is growing in the Muslim areas of Burma. I'm sure most people have heard of the repression of the Rohingya, our Muslim population, where many of those families have 15, 16 children. And the government has passed a law that only applies to them, that they can only have 2 children each. And there are massacres which are being ignored by the police and who are allowing it to happen. And there is a fear among the generals that this kind of uncontrolled population growth will overcome the Buddhist nature. I mean, the people in Israel have some of the same problems, the fear that the Palestinians will outnumber the Jews in what is a Jewish state, and we have a Buddhist state. Some people hold me to blame for not having stopped the massacre of the Rohingya, But it's hard for people to understand the way the government works and the fact that I have absolutely no power and no influence to make any changes. And certainly the Rohingya are more maligned than having done anything to anyone else. Our former kings conquered their country and eradicated it. And while our generals are saying, leave Burma, we want you to go and live in Bangladesh, the Bangladeshi rightly say they are not Bangladeshi. The kingdom that was their homeland is gone. So they are without passports, without country, and confined in a kind of apartheid way to the areas, and it's tragic. And when I become, if I become president, we'll have a very different country. But until then, really my hands are tied, and we must wait. This too will pass. Well, it's a pleasure for me to have people who are interested in what is happening in our country, because we've been so isolated for so long. We've been forgotten. And to feel that you don't matter to the world, that students can be killed on the street and monks murdered, and that no one takes note, that no one acts, that nothing changes, leads to passivity and despair. And so to know that people care about what is happening in Myanmar is really very heartwarming. So thank you very much for inviting me.
So what is the word?
Mingalaba.
Mingalaba.
But it is hello, not goodbye. Goodbye is a little more complicated, so Mingalaba will have to be.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today. See you next time.
The problems can all be solved with dedication and a little resolve. Obstacles slowly dissolve when we all just get involved. We can do it. Yes, we can. Yes, we can change things throughout the land. But we all